there are ships out here. Real ones. Rusting fishing trawlers, tipped over in the sand, more than 100 kilometers from the nearest water. They didn't wash up in a storm. They didn't crash. They were floating right here, catching fish, within living memory. And then the sea walked away from them. This is Moynaq, in Uzbekistan. It used to be a busy port on the Aral Sea, once the fourth largest lake on Earth. Today it sits in a desert that didn't exist a lifetime ago. And here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. That sea didn't simply die. It was taken, on purpose, by people who knew exactly what would happen. So why is there a graveyard of ships in the middle of a desert? To understand the ships, you have to picture the water that used to be here. The Aral was never fed by rain. It sat in a low desert basin and existed for one reason: two great rivers. The Amu Darya and the Sir Darya ran down from mountains hundreds of kilometers away, across the dry heart of Central Asia, and emptied into this bowl, pouring in just enough to balance what the fierce sun burned off. That fragile arithmetic filled an inland sea about 68,000 square kilometers wide, larger than some whole countries. Moynaq stood on its southern shore, a green rim of water and reeds in an ocean of sand, which means the sea had a hidden weakness built into it from the start. Take those two rivers away, and the whole thing is living on borrowed time. For a while, this was one of the Soviet Union's unlikely success stories. Moynaq became Uzbekistan's port city. Tens of thousands of people living off the water, boats leaving at dawn, a cannery packing Aral fish for the entire country. The sea was so generous that in 1921, when famine gripped the Volga region, the Aral fishing fleet sent tens of thousands of tons of fish north to feed the starving. Whole families grew up certain the water was simply eternal, that it had always been there and always would be. Children learned to swim in it. Old men were buried within sight of it. Nobody standing on that shore could picture the sea as anything but permanent. And that quiet certainty was about to become the cruelest kind of mistake. The turn came from a map in Moscow. In the 1960s, Soviet planners looked at the two rivers feeding the Aral and saw waste. Fresh water spilling into a lake instead of growing something profitable. So they redirected it. Thousands of kilometers of canals were cut to carry the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya out into the open desert to irrigate a vast new empire of cotton, the crop they proudly called white gold. The cotton bloomed, and the sea began to starve. First the shoreline slipped back by meters, then by kilometers. Boats settled onto dry ground. The water broke into separate pieces. The entire eastern half eventually vanished, and where waves had rolled, a brand new salt desert climbed out of the seabed. The Aral Sea, exhaling poisonous dust across the region. Here's where the story usually goes wrong. We tell it as a tragedy that happened to people, a sea that mysteriously died, a disaster nobody saw coming. But that isn't what happened. Moscow knew. The engineers had the reports. One Soviet expert flatly called the Aral a useless evaporator, a mistake of nature that had no business existing. Officials decided on paper that cotton was simply worth more than a sea. And some plans even meant to farm the dry lakebed afterwards. The Aral didn't slip away by accident. It was spent deliberately, like a line in a budget. What the planners got wrong wasn't whether it would die. They fully expected that. But how fast it would go, and how far its toxic, pesticide-laced dust would travel once the water was gone. And that is the real reason the ships are there. They aren't the wreckage of a natural catastrophe. They're the receipt for a decision, the proof of a moment when a government looked at one of the largest lakes on Earth and priced it below a field of cotton. But the boats carry one more lesson, and it isn't only despair. To the north in Kazakhstan, a single dam finished in 2005 trapped the water that remained, and the small northern Aral began to come back. The fish returned. The shoreline crept toward the old towns again. So Moynaq stands for two things at once: how quickly a sea can be spent, and how stubbornly, with effort, a piece of it can be bought back. That's why it's there. Every place hides a story like this, just beneath the surface. We'll keep digging them up, one map at a time.